Everyone can hear me fine, right?
Yep.
Okay, just making sure. Okay, so what we're gonna do is I'm gonna go over the agenda real quick for kind of this week, what to expect, and then we'll get into it. I don't think there's anything besides that we need to cover. So for this week, let me share my screen here. So you might have noticed on Brightspace here, under content, the new weekly folder has been uploaded or made available for you guys. So under week 2 is all the content that we're going to be covering today and Thursday. So under this folder, first little file here, the task list, and I have that open in the next tab here. So again, kind of a refresher, task list is going to outline all the materials we need and any assignments that need to be done this week, any practice problems relative to this week, anything like that. So going through the task list for this week, week 2, just the usual course resources, the textbook chapter PowerPoints, any practice files for the practice problems, and the review questions at the end of the chapter. For our tasks this week, we just have 2 tasks. First task is to cover chapter 2. So we're going to go over chapter 2, which is all of our basic drawing tools. And we're going to do practice problem 2A. And then it's up to you if you want that kind of extra prep or extra review. You can go through the review questions for chapter 2. Again, the solutions and the command summary list are already uploaded on D12, so you can access them whenever. Apart from covering chapter 2 for this week, we'll also be, I'll be handing out assignment 1. So assignment 1 is going to go out this week. Again, for this course, there's just 7 gradable assignments. They're all equally weighted. So this one being the first one is going to be pretty simple, and it's going to be a little bit of a kind of a freebie for marks. So don't expect anything kind of too heavy or anything like that. It's a pretty simple assignment. So just to kind of recap that, we're going to cover chapter 2 today, and then we're going to assign assignment 1 as well. So since we only are covering chapter 2 this week, it's pretty likely I'll be lecturing today for chapter 2, and then Thursday we'll cover anything that we didn't quite catch, and then the rest of the work period for Thursday is going to likely be kind of free work period. So I'll be in the Teams meeting for the full 2 hours, regardless if people need help or not for the assignment, but it's going to be generally kind of a free work period to work on assignment 1 and ask any questions if need be. Okay, so that's our kind of plan for this week. Any questions right away before we get started here? Good to go? Okay, sounds good. So, moving on to my little PowerPoint slide here for lesson 2. So in lesson 2 for this week, we're going to be going over some basic drawing and editing tools, just to get us kind of started. If you recall from last week, we kind of got started with opening drawing files, starting new drawings, saving files. We took a little bit of a tour around the user interface, kind of getting the names of different categories of different tools, where certain tools might be located. And we talked a bit about navigation, so kind of moving my drawing around so I can look at different points, zooming in and out, that kind of deal. So that's what we covered last week. This week, we're going to be talking more about some basic drawing so we can get started with our drawings here. So some things we're going to cover today are drawing, editing, and closing lines or series of lines. So starting out with real basic objects, we're just going to be drawing a bunch of lines and simple shapes. Removing objects from a drawing, very important if you make mistakes or if you need to make amendments to a drawing. if you kind of make a drawing and you submit it to your supervisor, and then your supervisor goes, hey, actually, we want this to look like this, and we're changing these parts of the drawing you're working on here. Then you might have to go back, delete some lines. So we're going to have to know how to remove some objects from our drawing, specifically lines or shapes. We're going to talk about drawing angles, rectangles, circles, and horizontal and vertical lines. So simple lines are only going to get us so far, so quickly. So we do want to kind of be able to use the rectangle tool to kind of speed things along. Circles aren't necessarily doable with just simple lines. So we're going to have to kind of talk about how to use circle tool. And then horizontal and vertical lines help us kind of align our drawing so there aren't weird kind of pitched lines that might cause problems down the line. Pun not intended. But we want kind of horizontal and vertical lines, perfectly horizontal or perfectly vertical, because like I was kind of talking about last week, we want our drawings to be fairly precise. If things don't line up properly, that can kind of cause problems for people that we're handing these drawings off to, that are actually going to be building our designs. Or it might cause problems for us, because if we're creating a drawing and then things don't line up, maybe something we're drawing doesn't fit properly when we go to kind of add more to that drawing later. And then finally, for this week, we're going to be talking about reversing effects of the last command, commonly known as undoing. Similar to other software you've probably used in the past, the good old Control-Z for undoing. We'll also talk about redo as well. Again, if kind of we make mistakes in our drawing, we want to know how to get rid of those mistakes and try again, right? So that's the general kind of thing we're going to be covering today. Moving on to our first slide here, drawing lines. So we're going to start with the line tool. There's a few ways we can access the line tool on AutoCAD. So we can either use the ribbon, which is, remember, the top set of tools on AutoCAD, to select line. And I'll open my AutoCAD here now. So on AutoCAD here, recall that we kind of talked about the ribbon. So that's this entire upper section here. Our line tool is on the Home tab under the Draw panel. So Home tab in the top left here, and then the Draw panel. So whenever we're adding objects to our drawing, any kind of lines or shapes, they're typically going to be under this Draw panel here. So we're starting out with the Line tool, which is going to make some straight line segments for us. So we can select it off of the ribbon just by left-clicking. What we can do is a bit of a shortcut as well. And again, this is up to personal preference. Also kind of what I said last week, it's up to you how you want to use these tools. If you prefer using the ribbon, by all means. If you prefer using commands or the dynamic input prompts, by all means, use that method. Whatever method's comfortable for you right now. Later down the line, you can kind of speed things along, figuring out more efficient ways to do things. But as we start out, just start with whatever's comfortable. So I can either select line from the ribbon itself to start my line command. What I can also do is type line, L-I-N-E, and that should give me the command for line. And all I have to do is hit enter. That will also give me line. And even faster yet, I can just type L, just the letter L, and hit enter. And that also gives me the line tool. Okay, so there's three kind of methods. I can pick it off of the ribbon. I can type line, L-I-N-E, either in the prompt or in the command bar down here. Or I can just use the letter L and hit enter to get line. Same thing with command bar. If I press L and then hit enter, this also gives me my line tool. So whichever of those three methods works best for you, by all means. So line tool, pretty simple. It's going to draw straight line segments. So what kind of information do I need to draw a line? What is a line defined by? If anyone can kind of take a shot at that question. Don't overthink it. It's fairly straightforward. If I was to draw a line on a graph, how would I describe to someone how to make that line?
The X, Y coordinate.
Sorry, could you repeat that? Your mic's a little low.
Need the X and Y coordinate?
Yep, X and Y coordinates. So that would get me started for the beginning of my line, and then I'd also need an endpoint to that line, right? So XY coordinates would get me to the first part of my line. What I'm kind of getting at here is the anatomy of a line, in quotation marks, is defined by its start point and an end point, right? And those start point and end point can be further defined by an XY coordinate, which is what you kind of mentioned there. So a line is just quite simply a start point and end point, and then it draws the line between those 2 points. So when I select the line tool, the first thing AutoCAD is going to prompt me with, and remember, if you have dynamic input on, it gives me the little prompt beside my crosshair there that says specify first point. Just as a bit of recall as well, if you don't have this prompt showing when you have the line tool active, just make sure in your status bar here you have dynamic input on. And if you don't see that button on your status bar, then go to your customization menu here, and it should be near the top, dynamic input. Just make sure that's check marked. So just in the customization menu, dynamic input should be active, which will show the button on your status bar. And if that button is shown, then it should be this guy right here, dynamic input. And just make sure that's on. So you can see when I start my line tool, the first prompt it's giving me with that dynamic input is to specify the first point of the line. So this can be any coordinate I want. I can either type in the coordinate or I can manually click on my drawing area. So I can left click on my drawing area and it will start my line segment. Or if I use the line tool, I can type in those coordinates. So I'll type in my first point. I'll use the coordinates 1, 1, x being 1 and y being 1. So I'll type in 1. And then to get to the next coordinate here, the y coordinate, I'll press comma and then type in 1 again. So to move from the x to the y, I just need to hit comma on my keyboard. And then hitting enter, that will give me my line segment starting at x equals 1, y equals 1. Okay, any questions so far? Everyone with me? Okay. Okay, so we've defined the start point of my line, and now to finish or to continue this line segment, I need to specify an end point to the line. So AutoCAD is now giving me the prompt on my screen there that says specify next point, or we'll get into that in a minute. So what I can now do is by default, it's now giving me a different set of coordinates to specify my next point. So what it's doing right now is that it's giving me a length and an angle to specify my next point. So I can use those parameters to define the next point. So I could type something like 1 and 45 degrees. To switch between length and angle, I just need to press Tab on my keyboard. So the Tab key will go between angle and length. And hitting Enter will create that next point. Now, I've specified the second point of my line, but AutoCAD's asking me for another point, a third point. And what AutoCAD is going to do is as I make these line segments and keep defining new points, it's going to do that infinitely until I tell it to stop making line segments. So I'm currently within the line command, and I need to exit out of the line command for it to stop asking me for new points. So what I'm going to do is press Escape to exit out of the command, and I'm back to my regular selection crosshair. Otherwise, if I use line and I click around, just to kind of quickly draw a bunch of line segments, AutoCAD's going to keep asking for next points almost infinitely. So it's going to keep asking for next points until I tell it to stop using that line command. So I can hit Enter, and that will end the command, or hit Escape, and that will also end the command. So going back to my line here, back to the specification of that first point, again, I'll put 1, 1. And then here I was talking about it changes from the first point to the second point. The first point asked me for coordinates, XY coordinates, and the second point it's asking me for a length and an angle. What I can do here is also force it to be coordinates. So it doesn't have to be a length and an angle. If I type something like 2 and then press comma again, it switches me back to the coordinate system. And I can hit 2 again, hit Enter, and now it's drawn that line up to and over to on that coordinate system. So something to note here as well is that when you make that second point, if you decide to use a coordinate system rather than the length and angle, that coordinate system that you're putting in is not relative to the origin of the drawing space. So notice how I typed 2, 2, and now if I check what the coordinates are of the end of this line, it's telling me that my x is equal to 3 and my y is equal to 3. So even though my second point I typed in 2, 2, my x and y are now 3 and 3. So it's relative to the previous point that I drew, not relative to the origin. Does that make sense? I know that can be a little confusing.
Sorry, 1 second. When
Yep.
I try and draw my line and enter the coordinates 1 and 1, my line connects to the origin, the y and x.
Yeah.
And when I try and type in the second coordinates, it doesn't seem to want to accept the command.
So by not accepting command, does it give you a prompt and then hitting enter does nothing, or does it not give you the prompt at all?
When I hit enter, my mouse or my coordinates, my crosshair, seem to move at a specific coordinate, but it doesn't enter. It just prompts me to give another coordinate.
Something to try if you're kind of getting a bit of an error like that is on your status bar at the bottom right here, just make sure your object snap to 2D reference points, make sure this is off. So on your
Object,
status bar,
it's off.
yeah,
Oh, okay, mine was on.
yeah,
Okay, let me
that
try again.
might be causing problems. We'll see. Is it still having that error?
Yes. It's still occurring.
Okay, what I'll do is I'm gonna continue on for now, and then I'll come back to you and just double check some settings with your AutoCAD.
Okay.
So just follow along just kind of visually for now, and then we'll get back to your error there and I'll try to help sort it out. Okay?
All right.
Okay. Any other questions about the line tool so far?
What button did you use to figure out what coordinate the endpoint was after you set it?
Yep. So if I go back to my line tool, so first I used coordinates 1, 1. So 1, 1 for those coordinates. And then the endpoint, by default, it's using a length angle. And if you want to use coordinates for the second point, I just have to do the same thing I did for the first point. So I can do 2 and then comma. Pressing comma will switch it from length angle to coordinates again. And then I can type 2.
It after the fact, which button did you hit on that bottom cursor? You hit something there.
Let me go back here. So 1, 1, and then 2, comma 2.
Yeah, so place that line.
Okay, and then enter.
So if you like forgot that you put it at 2 and 2, and you're like, I wonder what coordinate that is.
Oh, for checking what the coordinate is of the endpoint. So the command is ID, just ID, and then enter. And then if you have object snap on, or just click near the endpoint, then it'll tell you what the coordinates are of that point.
Got it, thank you.
Yeah. If you need to check at a glance as well for coordinates of any point on AutoCAD, you can also just kind of hover over it with your cursor. And then at the bottom here on your status bar, it should show your drawing coordinates as well. If this coordinates isn't showing, it's also just under the customization menu and then at the very top, coordinates. Okay. So just to kind of reiterate, when I drew this line, I started at 1, 1, 1, 1, and then by entering 2, 2, that endpoint is placed at the point 3, 3. So if I ID it again, click on that endpoint, it's saying my X is 3 and my Y is 3. So why would AutoCAD do this automatically? Why would it be relative to the previous point rather than always being relative to the origin of the drawing? Any guesses? Okay, so the reason it's relative to the previous point is because whenever we have blueprints, blueprints are generally in dimensions, right? It's not going to define every corner of an object by coordinates. It's going to tell me the length of this machined plate is 10 centimeters or something like that, right? It's going to be by dimensions. It's not like a connect the dots where it's telling me each coordinates of each corner. So there's no point in having the coordinates relative to the origin each time because you wouldn't know that at a glance from looking at blueprints. You'd have to do a lot of math to figure out where each corner is. So it's always relative, so you can input dimensions from a drawing very quickly just to kind of input those from a glance. If I kind of pull up an example here from the textbook, our drawings look generally kind of something like this, right? Where we have a start point at some coordinate, but we're given these dimensions. So if I drew this first corner in the bottom left and wanted to go to the top left next, I could just put in 20 in my y and 0 in my x, and I'd be able to draw that length of line. In much more complicated drawings, I might have to add multiple lengths together to find those absolute coordinates. So that's kind of why it's in relative coordinates, because of the way dimensions work on drawings. So I don't have to add 10 and 10 and 10 to figure out that's a total length of 30, just if this drawing didn't show that 30 there. I can just use those relative dimensions to come up with my lines. Okay. So in the line command, we have one last thing here as well. So with the line command, I specify my points. I can specify first point, second point, third point, etc., etc. I can specify those points based on coordinates. I can do it based on angles and lengths, or I can just manually click on my drawing window here. But you might also notice that on that prompt, it says specify next point or, and then a little down arrow. So as I kind of mentioned last week as well, whenever you see a down arrow on AutoCAD, that means there's more options. So now if I hit the down arrow on my keyboard, I get 2 additional options for the line command. So I can either specify the next point, or I got these new 2 options to either close the line command or undo. So close, we'll cover that one first. What close is going to do is it's going to make a line segment between my most recent point that I've specified and the very first point that I've specified. So if I go back here and use close now, remember I started with this first line segment over here to the left, and my most recent point I specified was this one here on the bottom right. So now if I use close, that will automatically draw that last line segment between my last point and my first point. So I'll close that shape into a closed object. Right? So something like if I drew a rectangle as well, or a square. If I drew something like a square starting at 1, 1, and then I'll do something like 1, 1, 1 again. Oh, no, I want to do 1, 1, 1, 90, 1, 0, 1, 270, oops, down. Right, it's relative. So if I'm drawing a square here and I've just made each side a unit length of 1, then I can use the close command to accurately close that object into a closed square. Or that shape, we'll say. The reason this is handy as well is if you're not using object snaps, we'll talk about those later though. If I do this kind of manually, and do my 1, 1, 1, 90, 1, 0, and 1, 90. If I try to do this manually, I can kind of eyeball it and try to figure out where that line connects. Or I'm going to have to know what the exact coordinates I started with were, which isn't terribly hard. We could just remember what coordinates we started with. But it's not always the case. You might draw something kind of complicated and not remember where you started. Or it might even just be a quicker way. Rather than typing the coordinates, you can just put in the close command. So if I kind of eyeball this and try to close it, I don't get a perfect square where these 2 lines aren't joining properly. So we want to generally use as many methods as possible to make sure our drawing is precise and everything connects properly. So that's one kind of reason to use close. Also, if you don't want to use your cursor to select close, you can hit the down arrow, and then rather than clicking close, we can just type C and then hit enter while in the line command. So at any point while you're using the line command, you can just type C and then hit enter, and it'll close your shape. Okay. On top of close in that menu there, we also have undo. So if I'm drawing my line segments here, and I'm drawing this out, and I go, wait a minute, I wanted to make an octagon, not a hexagon, then I can hit the down arrow and select undo, and that will undo the last point that I've selected on my line command. So I'll go down, hit undo, and it'll go back one line segment. So undo the most previous point that I've specified within that line command.
Will Control Z do the same thing?
Not quite. So if I do this and finish my hexagon here and Control Z, the entire thing goes away. So the difference between Control Z and undo is that undo is within the line command, so it can undo specific points. When we use Control Z, it's on a command basis, so it's going to undo that entire line command. So with my line command here, if I use U to undo, it's going to go back just one line segment. But if I finish this and use Control Z, it's going to remove the entire thing. So Control Z is like on a command basis, and then undo is on a prompt basis or input basis. You can Control Z within the command as well, but it's just a little wonky that it does it outside of the command and inside of the command. So it's a bit safer to use undo. Okay. Any questions about the line tool? Okay. Moving on here. So that pretty much covers our line tool. And let me go back here. So we talked about specifying the length and angle or the coordinates, using the close and undo command. Moving on now to erasing objects. So once we've drawn objects, maybe I made a mistake, maybe something needs to be changed, then we need to know how to remove those lines as well. So I've kind of been demonstrating it a little bit, but we'll talk about what that specifically kind of entails. So if I use my line tool, and let's say I'm going to draw my hexagon here again, just crudely. And then my boss comes up to me and he says, actually, we don't want this to be a hexagon. We want it to be an octagon. What am I going to do now? So what we'll use to kind of remove line segments, if we made mistakes or there's amendments to a drawing, what we'll use is the erase tool. So erase is going to be in our modify panel, in our home tab again on the ribbon. So home tab, modify panel, and then here's our erase button. Looks like the back end of a pencil, the eraser of a pencil. So when I select erase, you can see my crosshair is now this little square instead of the proper cross. And now AutoCAD is prompting me to select objects. So it's going to ask me to select what specifically I want to erase. If I hover over any part of this hexagon now, I can see that the line is grayed out and there's a little red X beside my crosshair there. or my cursor. And that's just letting me know that that's what I'm hovering over right now. So now if I left click, I will select that object. That little red X will disappear and the line will stay gray now, even if I move my cursor away. So now I know that line has been selected for erasing. So I can do this to multiple parts of the line tool that I used earlier, multiple line segments. And then when I'm done selecting things to erase, I'll just hit enter. And that will remove those lines. Now, if I'm drawing something, let me draw my hexagon again. So if I'm using the erase tool and I select the top there by accident, and I go, wait a minute, I need to keep that top line because I'm making an octagon, I can keep those lines in there. What I can do is hold Shift and left click, and that will undo that selection. So holding Shift on my keyboard and clicking something will deselect the object. So left click to select, Shift left click at the same time to deselect. And then again, I can hit enter to remove them and then go back to drawing my octagon here. Again, very crudely. Okay. So while we're here with the erase tool, it's specifying to select an object. What is an object in AutoCAD? So what we mean by an object is any individually selectable drawing piece on our drawing. So I can select on this hexagon, even if I were to remove it and draw it out, or that octagon, sorry. If I drew this octagon out again and I use C to close even, this is one solid octagon. I even use the C tool to close it to make sure it's properly joined. But even then, I can individually select each line segment on this octagon. So each of these line segments is its own object. Anything that's individually selectable is an object. Okay, that's why it's saying select objects, plural, because I'm selecting multiple line segments. Okay, any questions about erasing?
Hey, Ben, do you think the delete button will do the same thing?
Yes, we're just about to get there, yeah. So
Thank you.
I might as well get there now just because you brought it up. But what you can also do, instead of using the erase tool from the modify panel, is that if I don't have any tool active at the moment, then I can left click on these line segments and it'll highlight them in blue and give me these little grip squares. That just tells me that I've selected those objects when they're highlighted blue. And when I select these lines, I can then hit the delete key on my keyboard, and that will also remove line segments. Okay. Yep, so that's where I was just about to get to. We covered erase here from the modify panel, and then when you're not in a command, use the delete key. So up to you, whichever you prefer. If you prefer using the erase tool, by all means. If you prefer selecting and using the delete key, then by all means use that method as well. Okay, so we're going to go into some additional settings and tools to help us draw here. So next kind of step is drawing vertical, horizontal, and at specific angles very quickly. So if I go back to AutoCAD here, if I'm using the line tool and just kind of clicking randomly, there's no precision to the angles that I'm making here. They could be to infinitely long decimal points. I wouldn't really know unless I change the way angles are viewed on AutoCAD. But even though it says 14 degrees there on my prompt, it's not necessarily perfectly 14 degrees. There's probably some decimals afterwards. So we want our drawings to be precise when we're making angles or any lengths of straight line. So what we're going to do is use a couple tools. One is called Ortho Mode and another is called Polar Mode. So starting with Ortho Mode. Ortho Mode is down on our status bar here. It's this little right angle kind of button on the status bar called Ortho Mode, or Restrict Cursor Orthogonally. And it's also the F8 key on your keyboard. So you can either click it down here on the status bar to turn it on or off, or I can use F8 on my keyboard to turn it on or off. And what Ortho Mode is going to do is that when I start a line, it's now restricted to perfectly horizontal or perfectly vertical. So when I have Ortho Mode on, I can only make lines at 0 degrees, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, or 270 degrees. And again, this helps with making a lot of right angles on drawings. Drawings are full of right angles, so we use them very commonly, which is why we have a tool specifically for right angles. And that helps make sure that when I'm drawing, that I'm not accidentally making it 90.05 degrees or something like that, because that can cascade into problems down the line. So when I use Ortho Mode, I'm making perfectly straight lines. This can help a lot as well. If I go back to making my little square here, putting my coordinates 1, 1, I can now just move my cursor vertically, type in 1, hit enter, move my cursor to the right, press 1, hit enter, move my cursor down, hit 1, press enter, and then to the left, press 1, hit enter. So it speeds things up a lot when we're kind of making those right angles, and ensures that our right angles are truly right angles as well. You might notice as well, when Ortho Mode is on, the direction that your line is being formed is based on your cursor position. So if my cursor is to the right of that starting point, it's going to make a 0 degree line. If it's up, it's going to make 90, so on and so forth. So it's based on your cursor position to lock to these specific angles. Okay. On top of Ortho Mode, we also have Polar Mode. So Polar Mode hangs out right beside Ortho Mode here, and it's this little circle with a little angle in there, a little 45-degree angle, right next to the Ortho Mode button on the status bar. Should be called Restrict Cursor to Specified Angles or Polar Tracking. Again, I can either click it to turn it on or off, or in this case, I can use the key F10 on my keyboard to also turn it on or off. And what polar tracking is going to do is it's going to give me these green tracking lines to help me draw lines against specific angles. So by default here, with my line tool, now when I draw my line tool, as I approach the 90 degrees, or the 0 degrees, I suppose, to the right, I get this green tracking line, and you can see my line tool snaps to it. So this is also helpful for drawing very specific angles to make sure that you're not out by a few degrees, if you want to do them quite rapidly without having to input them each time. So we have 0. As I go up to the 90 here, you'll see it snap to the 90 and point straight up with that green tracking line. And then as I go to the left here, again, it snaps and gives me that tracking line. What's handy about polar tracking is that unlike ortho, where it only does 90-degree angles, we can specify polar angles smaller than 90 degrees. So you might notice here as well, beside polar tracking, is it's got another down arrow. Again, meaning it has more options to it. So if I click on that down arrow beside polar tracking, I can see I get a big list of different angles to track at. So right now I have it set to 90 degrees. So it's showing 0, 90, 180, 270. I can change it to 45. So it shows 45, 90, 115, 180, etc. And it gets to smaller and smaller angles. So I can switch it to 45 now. And now when I make this line segment, it's showing me 0. It's also showing me 90, but it's also showing me the 45 degrees between those two angles. So if you find yourself very commonly in a drawing, you might see that it has 45-degree angles very often. You might want to switch on polar mode, and that'll help you kind of jot along those angles to make sure they're both precise and to kind of help you speed up a little bit. Again, AutoCAD isn't hard, it's just tedious. So a lot of things, a lot of extra options are just to kind of speed things along. Okay, and then we can do the same thing, smaller angles. If I go down to 30 degrees, we start out at 0. I now get a tracking line at 30. I get one at 60. And then finally at 90. And then so forth, or so on and so forth around the circle here. I get more tracking lines. What we can also do with polar tracking is that if I right click on the button or use the same down arrow, either one works, we also get a little section here at the bottom for tracking settings. So if my specified angle that I'm using very often isn't in this list, then I can add it to the list or make my own list. So if I choose tracking settings here, we get this little pop-up window. And on the left-hand side, we're mostly going to be focusing on the left here, is that we can change the increment angle, and we can also add additional angles to our polar tracking. So again, if I go back to my list here, and it goes 90, 45, 30, etc. What if I wanted 40-degree angles? Then I can go into my tracking settings. I can put the increment angle as 40 degrees. Hit OK. And now it's giving me polar tracking at 40 degrees. Even though that wasn't in the list, I can specify it so it will do every 40 degrees. So then at 80, I get another 120, 160, etc. So if you don't find your angle in this list, we can specify our own increment angle. What we can also do is add additional angles. And what this will do is that if I check mark this little box to make it active, and then hit new, we can specify independent angles that will have polar tracking active for them. So I can put something like 15 in here. And then as that additional angle is in that box now, I'll just hit OK. And now when I go back to my line tool, I have my 0 degrees. I now have 15 degrees, 40, 80, etc. So when we add that additional angle to this list, it's only counting that one angle. It's not counting any complementary or 90-degree associated angles at all. It's just purely that specific angle, 15 degrees. And remember, we start at 0 to the right, and we make our way around counterclockwise. So if I add additional angles, it's only going to add that one angle across the entire circle. Whereas the increment angle is going to give us those divisions. So 40, 80, 120. Whereas 15, it's just going to give us 15. It's not going to give us 30. It's not going to give us 195, nothing like that, just 15. And if we want to remove any of these angles, we also have a little delete button. So I can hit delete and I'll remove it from my additional angles. Or we can just turn the box off and it'll disable them without you having to delete them. So I'll change this back to 90 for my increment angle. Hit OK. And I'll go back to 0, 90, 180, etc. So if you find yourself using a specific angle very often, again, this is to help with precision. It's to help with speed. Okay. Any questions about ortho mode or polar mode? All good. Okay, we'll take a quick 10-minute break. So we'll reconvene at 7:02, let's say. And then we'll continue on with the last few tools and a little practice problem. Okay.
Oh, hey, Brent. About my issue with my AutoCAD.
Yep.
I think I figured out why I was unable to get specific small coordinates. It appears that my grid is off, and it's like 1,000 measurement blocks wide.
Oh, you're just zoomed out too far probably then, right?
Zoomed out. Yeah. I scrolled back in, but my grid lines are huge. How can I fix that?
So what you can do is I'll share my screen real quick. Down here on your status bar, there's a button called Display Drawing Grid or Grid Mode. This guy right here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just right click on that and hit Grid Settings.
Okay.
And then it should say here for grid spacing on the right, it should be in something reasonable like 1 or 0.5 or something like that.
Oh, mine says 10.
Yeah.
It's just 1.
Yep, so you can
1.
change it to something a bit smaller.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Does that look better?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
There's another question. Yep.
Yeah. So I'm not sure how much familiarity you have with Bluebeam or anything like that, but in Bluebeam you're able to make a tool or a graphic. Then you're able to save it and save it into your tools. Are you able to do that with AutoCAD? Like, so you can draw something like, I really like this hexagon. I want to save it for another future project.
Yeah. Yeah. AutoCAD has that functionality. In AutoCAD, they're called blocks.
Oh,
so
okay.
If I go into here, if you just want to like check it out, if I draw something like a square, my really crappy square here.
Yeah, awesome square.
And then I really like this square, so I'm going to keep it around. What I'll do is I can select it, and then under the Insert tab, we have blocks here.
Oh, create block. Okay.
Yeah. So if I create a block out of it, I have to give it some arbitrary name here.
Oh, okay.
Now this is one object, and I can recall it from the insert here on the far left.
Now, is that only for this project, or is that for all your projects? Like it saves it.
That's
as, like,
for
future
that's
block.
for this project, but you're able to export the block
Okay,
file
yeah.
out, or you can save the drawing file and the block will be embedded in that drawing, so you can pull it out at any time.
Oh, okay. So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Insert export. Okay. Makes
Yeah.
sense. Okay. Yeah, that's similar to some other software I work with. So
Yeah. I'm not too familiar with Bluebeam, but I know I've worked with SolidWorks and a couple other softwares, and they're pretty similar. A lot of them have
yeah.
like kind of similar functionality. They just have different like wording or maybe slightly different tools.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
Oh, one more question for you.
Yep.
I'm just doing the assignment for this week. Simple 1 and Simple 2 or whatever they're called. Are they just blank documents? They have nothing inside them?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I opened the right thing then.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Hello, Brent.
Yep.
I have a question. So, when I draw lines and when I use the coordinate system, for example, let's say I selected the line command and I chose 1 1.
Yep.
Then I'll start at 1 and then I said 2 2 2 comma 2. I will have a line that's 2 coordinates long, but it's not straight. It's like 45 degrees always when I do that, even when I select 90 degrees or 180 degrees.
Yeah. So by inputting on the second point, if you put 2, 2, that means your
Yeah.
next point is going to be 2 to the right for the X and 2 up
Okay.
for the Y. So if you're going an equal amount to the right and up, you're always going to make a 45-degree line.
Okay. Yeah.
So if you
Okay.
try something like 2 comma 0, then it should make a line straight to the right. Or if you use
Okay.
0
Yeah.
comma 2, it'll make a vertical line.
0, 2. Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep, no problem.
Okay.
Okay, we'll continue on here. So I will go to the right slide here and share my screen. So a couple things I'll also mention. I just realized should say a bit more explicitly. First thing, when using polar mode, so if I select my line tool and I have polar mode active, I just have it set to 45 degrees right now. If you want to use polar mode to help you draw those precise lines, when it snaps to these tracking lines, all you have to do is enter a length. So you don't have to specify the angle for that line because it's specified by the tracking line. So all I have to do is put something like 1 in and hit enter, and it'll give me that 45-degree line. Or if I put it up to 90 degrees and type 2, it'll give me a 90-degree line with a length of 2. So I don't have to put in that angle at all with my polar tracking. Okay. What else? I think that's it. Okay, so we'll continue on here. Let me go back to my slides. So next on the list here is drawing rectangles. So we talked about lines. We'll talk about rectangles as well now. Let me go back to AutoCAD. So just like all of our other drawing tools, rectangle is going to be in the draw panel in the top left here. And rectangle is the little rectangular button. So what rectangle is going to do is it's going to ask us for 2 specific points, and then it's going to draw the rectangle based on those 2 opposite corners of the rectangle. So if I do something like 1, 1 to specify my first corner, just like the prompt is saying there on AutoCAD, the first prompt says specify first corner point. So I'll do something like 1, 1, hit enter. Now that first corner is at the point 1, 1, and I can either manually stretch and move that rectangle, or I can specify the other corner point. So if I put something like 2, 2 and hit enter, then I have a rectangle with 1 unit lengths from 1, 1, or sorry, 2 unit lengths, 1, 1 to the corner 3, 3 there. Okay. You can also just kind of manually draw the rectangle. So I can click on the drawing window rather than inputting those coordinates. And I can click to the opposite corner to draw that rectangle as well. And then finally, I can also use the rectangle tool. And as I draw it out, after specifying my first point, I can specify that rectangle based on lengths. So I can input the width of this rectangle. So I can put something like 5 units. And then using tab again to switch between those 2 input prompts. So I press tab to change to the height of the rectangle. I can put in something like 2 and then hit enter. And that will give me a rectangle of width 5 and height 2. Okay. So I can do it purely by coordinates. I can manually click, or I can specify the first coordinate and then specify the length or the width and the height of that rectangle. So it's just a quick way to make rectangular shapes. If you need to make boxes, your squares and rectangles. It's a bit quicker than having to do 3 line segments and then close. So it's just a bit of a shortcut for your rectangular shapes. Okay. Moving on here. Oh, one thing I should mention here as well. So you might notice as well when you make that rectangle. So if I use the line tool, I'm going to make a rectangle with the line tool first. So I'm just going to start anywhere here, and then I'll just use Ortho Mode to speed things up. So I'm just going to make it 2 by 2 by 2, or well, 2 by 2, I suppose. So 2, 2, 2, and close. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the rectangle tool. So I'm going to start wherever, it doesn't matter. And then I'm going to specify the length and the height here as 2 and 2. So 2, tab 2, and press enter. So these should be identical squares. Both of them have side lengths of 2, and they're both fully equal in their side lengths. They're both squares, right? So one thing you'll notice is that these 2 squares are actually a little bit different. They're not actually the perfect identical squares. If I start hovering over these lines, you can see they kind of start to light up. Just like with when we're using line command, each one of these sides is its own object. But with my rectangle tool, the rectangle has made one rectangular object. I can't individually click on these sides. It made one rectangle as one object. Whereas this one on the left is 4 objects, 4 line segments. This one on the right is one rectangular object. So something to kind of keep in mind when you use the rectangle tool is that the rectangle tool isn't going to make those line segments separate from each other. They're going to be one object. which might cause a bit of trouble down the line, because if you use the erase tool, I can no longer select just a side of that rectangle. We have to erase the entire thing because it's one object. But my one on the left here with the line tool, these are all separate objects. Okay, just something to keep in mind. We'll talk about how to join and explode. Those are the kind of terms to join and separate line segments from objects. But that's later down the line. Don't worry about it for now. But it's just something to keep in mind when you use the rectangle tool. It's just making one object. Before we move on to circles as well, we'll talk about a little bit about polyline here as well, just because it kind of fits into the same line. So in our draw panel here as well, we have another button called Polyline. So we have line and polyline. So try it out a little bit here. Use line and try to draw a shape. I'll turn my ortho mode back off. Draw a shape with line, and then draw a shape with polyline. What's the difference between these two?
They're inverted.
Besides my crappy drawing. Pretend they're the same shape.
The polyline makes it all one object.
Yeah, exactly. So line is going to make each line segment its own object. Polyline, once you're finished making a polyline and you end that polyline command, that series of line segments is going to be one object. So now if I go back again and select these sides, I made this with line. So this is 4 objects with the line tool. I made this right one with polyline, and it's again one object, just like the rectangle tool.
Yeah, but can't you just take those 4 objects and group them together?
Yep, you can. You have to go through an extra command, which is a bit of tedium. So it's just to kind of skip it over. I could do join, and then this is one object again. That's just the command join, J-O-I-N. We'll talk about that later when we talk about editing commands. But yes, there is a command to just put them back together again. So polyline kind of saves us from having to use that join tool down the line. One kind of catch is if I'd make this line, let's say I make something complicated here. This is a machined plate. Try your best to use your imagination. I'm not going to be very accurate with it. But if I draw something over it, compared to if I take the same thing here, with a line. So if I now want to go back and join these lines with the line tool, it becomes a pain selecting it all. Because if I want to just manually group it, I accidentally group other things along with it. Unless I use like a crossing window. I could grab it, but it causes a bit of tedium and a bit of headache down the line. So there is reasons why you'd want to use polyline over just standard lines. Because with this one on the left with polyline, I can easily just pick it and it gives me the whole object. This one here, I kind of have to manually get all those sides. Or focus a little bit more when I go to select it. To kind of accurately grab that one tool, or that one rectangle. So there is use cases for polyline. It just saves you that step and then some headache down the line. Shortcut for polyline as well. If you don't want to use the ribbon here, it's P-line. That should give you polyline. And then you can do your polyline. Thing to note as well with polyline, it doesn't have to be a closed object or a closed shape to be one object. So even though this is not a closed shape. It's still one object. Okay, so that's a bit of a kind of dipping our toes into polylines. So rectangles are going to make polylines as well, just in the shape of a rectangle. It's going to form one object. Okay, any questions about polylines or rectangles before we move on to circles? Okay, sounds good. Okay, so moving on to circles. So drawing circles, again, draw is going to be in our draw panel. We'll go over to AutoCAD again. So clicking on the circle tool on my draw panel will give me my circle. But you might also notice, again, another down arrow. This down arrow is going to give me a list of different ways to specify how I want to draw that circle. So we have a few different ones: center radius, center diameter. We'll get into these in a second here. We're going to start with center radius because that's the default. So with center radius, if I just click on the circle tool without choosing anything from that list there, the default is generally center radius. And the name implies how I'm going to design that circle. So it's called center radius. So I'm going to have to just define the center point of that circle and the radius of that circle. And then AutoCAD will draw the rest for me. So the first prompt AutoCAD's going to give me is to specify the center point for the circle. I can put something like 4, 4. So 4 on the x-axis, 4 on the y-axis. This is going to be the center point of my circle. Not the edges, not like the bottom edge or the left edge or anything like that, the center point of the circle. And then after I hit enter, it's going to ask me to specify the radius of the circle. So I can specify any radius here. I'm going to put in 1 and hit enter. And then AutoCAD's going to neatly draw me that circle. So I specified a center point, a radius, and then AutoCAD does the rest for me and draws that circle based on that information. Okay, and then the circle again is one object. There's no line segments to divide this up into anyways, so it is one object. Now, if I go into my down arrow menu for the circle, one thing I'll mention as well, you can also type circle, and that will give you your circle command. It will use whatever you have currently set, whatever specification method you have. It'll use whatever's up here when you just type circle. Okay, so we talked about center radius. I can change it to center diameter. So if I change this to center diameter now, and I do the same thing, 4, 4 for my center point, and then I need to specify diameter after I hit enter. Here I'll put 1 again, and if I press enter, now I have a circle that's centered on the point 4, 4 and has a diameter of 1. So it should be half the size of the previous circle, because the previous circle had a radius of 1. This one has a diameter of 1. Okay. We have a few other methods in here. We have 2-point and 3-point. These aren't terribly commonly used, as far as I know, but we'll go over them anyway. 2-point and 3-point are going to specify 2 endpoints or 3 endpoints of anywhere on your drawing, and it's going to draw a circle that connects between those 2 or 3 points. So if I use 2-point, it's going to ask for the first endpoint of the circle's diameter. So this can be any coordinate. And what it's going to be doing is I'm going to be specifying a point on one side of the circle, and I'm going to be specifying a point on the exact opposite side of that circle. So if I now do this one, we'll put it at 6,2, let's say. And then the opposite side we'll put at 8,2. Or no, that was a bad example. Let's do 6,2. And let's do 8,4. Yeah. So I'll try to put a circle that matches those 2 points that I specified. Or if I were to manually do it just by clicking, I click on the first side of the circle, and you can see it's expanding that diameter across to the second point of that circle. Okay. So my 6,2 was about here. And then my 8,4, where was it trying to put it? Back here somewhere. Oh, right. Sorry. Relative. So 14,8 would be the opposite extreme. So somewhere up here. Okay. We also have 3 point. So if I specify 3 points on that circle, it will try to draw a circle between these 3 points. So if you draw any triangle, there should be a circle that fits around that triangle. So then I can draw it like this as well. This can be a bit more handy if you have something pre-drawn. 2 point and 3 point are usually if you have things pre-drawn and you need a circle to fill in a gap. It's not very practical if you're just drawing a circle in blank space like this. If I have something like 2 lines, say something like this, and I want a circle that fits neatly between these 2 lines, then using 2 point, I can stick it between these 2 lines, and it fits nicely. So I don't have to know the distance across between those 2 lines. I can just neatly fill in that circle very quickly. Same with 3 point. If I get rid of this stuff here, make sure my scale's right here. And we'll do something like this. If I have 3 lines pointing kind of like this, then I can fit a circle that fits in the center here. Nice and snug between those 3 lines. So again, 2 point and 3 point, I don't see it generally used that much, but it's mostly if you have pre-drawn stuff and you want to have a circle that fits within something that's pre-drawn. It doesn't make much sense to use it over center radius or center diameter on blank space. Because there's no way you'd know exactly what 3 points would make a certain circle of diameter, whatever, right? Okay. The more useful ones here, back to some slightly more useful ones, tan radius and tan. Does anyone know what tan might be short for?
Tangent.
Tangent.
Yeah, tangent. Does anyone know how to define a tangent?
Opposite over adjacent.
Yep, mathematically,
A line
yes.
that touches a circle. A line that touches the circle at one point.
Yep. So a line that touches a circle at exactly 1 point. So if I go back here and draw, how should I do this? Let's draw rectangles. I'm just going to draw a couple rectangles here. So if I have some rectangles here, and I want a circle that fits snugly between these three rectangles, then I can use tangent, tangent, tangent. Just as the name describes, it's going to ask me for 3 tangents. So I can specify that this line is going to be tangential to the circle. This right side of this rectangle will be a tangent. And then this top side of this last rectangle will be a tangent. And it will put a circle between those 3 shapes, where that circle is tangential to this bottom line, this right side line, and this bottom line, or this top line, I suppose. So if I zoom in, that circle should meet at 1 point on that line. It's not perfect because AutoCAD doesn't go to like infinite precision, but it does by far more precision than you'd ever really need. So if I zoom in here, it should meet that line. And then if I zoom in on this one here, it should pretty closely meet that corner. So it's just another way to specify how to draw that circle. In this case, you just have to specify the tangents. You don't even have to know any specific mathematical dimensions of that circle. I don't even know what the radius of this circle is. I never specified that. I never specified the center point either. AutoCAD did all the math for me. Same with tan radius. This will do 2 tangents and then a radius between them, or for the circle itself. So if I do tan radius, I'm going to draw a couple circles first to be tangential to, and then my tan radius, I'll choose the first circle on the left to be the first tangent, circle on the bottom right to be the second tangent, and then the radius of the circle it's asking me to specify. Let me just double check what my dimensions here. Let's give it a 5. Hit enter. So now I have this third circle that's just appeared, and it is tangential to the previous 2 circles, the one on the left and the one on the bottom. So it should be tangential. It touches it at 1 point. Same with this one. Touches it at 1 point. And I specified the specific radius of that circle. So if I use my measure tool up in utilities, I should be able to go to radius, check that that circle has a radius of 5, just like I specified. Okay, so I just used the measure tool here, went down to radius just to double check that as well. We'll talk about the measure tool a bit more detail later down the line. Okay, so we have a lot of different methods to use circles. Obviously, the most common are going to be radius or center radius, center diameter. Tan radius and tan can be pretty handy. We're not very often going to use 2 point or 3 point though. Okay, and then like I mentioned, whatever circle tool that you used last is going to become the active circle tool. So if I last used tan, and I go back and type in circle to get the circle command. Oh, I guess I have a different setting on. It's going to default, I guess, by default, it'll go back to your center radius. But it'll change the button up here to be whatever you last used. So just keep that in mind as well. Okay, any questions about circles? All good? Okay. So last section on this chapter is undo and redo. So kind of like what you talked about with the undo tool or the undo command on the line tool, where if I draw a bunch of lines, I can use U and hit enter to go back a line segment and undo that last point I specified. Our undo and redo buttons are going to undo and redo commands. So entire commands that we've done. So the undo and redo are up on our quick access toolbar up at the top left. So we have undo here and we have redo. So if I do any command here and I end that command, if I hit undo, it's going to undo that entire command. What undo also has is a little drop-down menu, and it shows you the history of what commands you've recently used. So you can go and undo multiple commands at a time. So if I drew a bunch of rectangles in a row, oops, then I can use the undo little drop-down menu. I use rectangle 3 times, so I can go back to this last time I used line, and it'll undo all 3 of those rectangle commands. And then if I want to redo, maybe I went too far back in my command list and accidentally undid too many steps, I can also use redo. And this will give me a history of things I've done with undo. So I undid those 3 rectangles. I can redo all of them and get those rectangles back. And then shortcuts for these are Control Z. Control Z will undo. Control Y will redo. So Control Z and Control Y. What you can also do is right-click on your drawing window, and in your shortcut menu, you also have an undo button here as well. Or, again, you can use the command. You can type U to undo, but you have to type redo to redo. The full 4 letters. The redo command only works for 1 step, I believe. Yeah. So it says here just above my command line, redo must immediately follow the U or undo command. So if you undo, you must immediately redo if you're using the command. You can still use the list up here as well. So if I undo a bunch, you still get the whole list here. Okay. So that's our undo, redo. Again, for if you make mistakes and you need to go back and undo. If you undo too far, then maybe you need to redo. Any questions about undo and redo? All good? Okay. So that pretty much concludes chapter 2. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce the first assignment, so you can start working on it if you feel like you need to. Or I'll also introduce practice 2A, which we'll cover on Thursday as well. So in the textbook, part of our task list here was read chapter 2. We've gone through it now, and do practice 2A. So we'll go through practice 2A on Thursday. I'm going to introduce it to you now, so you can do it on your own time if you want to get a bit ahead, or if you just want to be checking your answers when we get to Thursday. If you don't have a textbook yet, practice 2A is in the chapter 2 of the textbook, but in week 2, we also have AutoCAD textbook chapter 2 and 3. So if you don't have a textbook yet, you can still use this PDF document to pull up the textbook. And then if I zoom out a little bit here, this out of the way. then I should be able to find, maybe not in here. I'll use this one. Maybe I can't use the find tool. I think I'm on it anyways. But if you scroll through this, you should be able to get to practice 2A. Let me just double check the page number here. Is this it? Yeah, this is 2A. So this is on page, what does it say on here? 2-14 of chapter 2. Okay, chapter 2, page 14 should be practice 2A. So you can go through that and prep it for Thursday. We'll go through it as a class. I'll also introduce assignment 1. So assignment 1, again, in the week 2 folder. Let me go back here. So the week 2 folder of Brightspace here has assignment 1, the second file here. It's a PDF document. And when you open it up, it should look like this. So our first assignment is textbook chapter 3. The AutoCAD textbook chapters, I think it's every 3 chapters or so, give or take, is a kind of practice chapter for you to do projects and get some practice in. So chapter 3 will be our first assignment. It's a project chapter. It just has a couple problems in it that you have to go through. So the procedure for this assignment, going through it, you'll be completing 3.1. If I go back to my textbook here, here. This is chapter 2 and 3. So you'll find practice 2A in here and chapter 3. So if I scroll down a ways, this is really zoomed in. When I get to chapter 3 here, so chapter 3, projects creating a simple drawing. We'll be completing 3.1, create a simple drawing, and 3.2, create simple shapes. So these last 2 pages of this PDF are chapter 3. We'll be going through those these 2 kind of sample projects for assignment 1. So going through procedure here, complete 3.1, create a simple drawing. You're going to have to use the file simple1.dwg. This is mentioned in the instructions themselves in the chapter. So open simple1.dwg. Make sure you are using the right file. You should not be using a new drawing file. It should be based on the simple1.dwg. If you open simple1.dwg, and same goes for simple2, you'll notice that they're blank drawing files. So don't be alarmed if you open simple1 or simple2 and it looks like a blank drawing. It's supposed to look like a blank drawing. Okay. So simple1, it's in your textbook chapter practice files on Brightspace, same file or folder that we get all of our practice files from. Going back here, let me use this one. In our textbook chapter practice files, so simple1 and simple2 should be in here for you to download. Go through the procedure in the textbook for those 2 projects, and then save the drawing file as per the file format below. So this is this file is your deliverable for assignment 1. So file name format is your name, first name, last name, assignment 1-3.1.dwg. So your file name has to match this format. This isn't just like me nitpicking or anything like that. This is pretty common practice in industry. You generally want your files to be organized by some specific format. so it isn't a pain when you're looking through your file explorer and looking through a bunch of drawing files and not really knowing which is which. So we're going to follow a specific file name format to help with that kind of organizational skill as well. Okay. And then step 2 of the procedure, complete 3.2, same idea. 3.2 in the textbook, create simple shapes. You'll go through the procedure in here. Save the drawing file as per the file format, same thing. And then there's a little note here as well. Draw only the objects. The dimensions are for reference only. We haven't even covered dimensions, so I'm not expecting you to draw dimensions. So if you look at these practice examples, you're just drawing this kind of shape here. I'm not looking for these angles. I'm not looking for the dimensions. It's just the shape drawn in black, not these red dimensions. Same with 3.1. I'm not looking for any of this text or any of these dimensions. It's just the shape drawn in black. Okay. And then once you have simple 1 and simple 2, rename them to the format. You've drawn those shapes. Then you'll take your 2 drawing files, and these will be submitted on Brightspace in the assignment 1 submit folder. So if I go to the top here to assessments, assignments, there's a new assignment here, assignment 1. You'll just go in here and you'll upload by hitting add a file. You'll upload your 2 drawing files. So your submissions for assignment 1 should be 2 drawing files, one for 3.1 and one for 3.2. Okay. And then once you've added those, you can hit submit and then I'll grade them. Just a bit of a reiteration on assignments as well. I have no problem with you guys communicating about how you do assignments. Like if you have a question to a friend asking, hey, what tool did you use to draw this symbol? I can't really wrap my head around it or something like that. Or where did you find this tool? Or where did you change these settings? I have no problems with any of that. Any kind of verbal collaboration. The main problem is if you share any files. So you cannot share any drawing files with each other. It falls under that kind of plagiarism rule, right? So do not share files, but you're free to talk about the assignments. They're not tests, so you can talk about them as much as you like. Okay, and then finally, due date. It's not until the end of the semester. Like I mentioned, the 7 assignments, there's no strict due dates on them. They're just due at the end of the semester. But I will mention some of them get pretty tedious. So you don't want to leave these for long. If you're consistently doing the assignments before the next assignment comes out, which is approximately every 2 weeks, because we have 7 assignments, 14 weeks in a semester, there's going to be about an assignment every other week. If you're doing the assignment before the next assignment comes out, you're on perfect track. Okay. You don't want to leave them to the last minute, or else you're going to get swamped with work.
And you said if we make a mistake or anything like that, you'll just send it back to us and let us know what the mistake is?
Yep. So if you submit, the extra advantage to submitting early is you get feedback early. So if you send your drawing to me, I will correct it, tell you what's wrong with it. And then if you make those adjustments, you're allowed to resubmit and I'll update your grade as well. Any questions about assignment 1? There's a question about the assignments available in PDF. I believe it's just, if I go back to content here. So in week 2, so the assignment 1 PDF is going to talk about file format and such. And then the textbook chapter 2 and 3, where the chapter 3 assignment actually is. These are both PDFs.
And then
Okay.
also for like the assignment you were saying with the shapes, it doesn't have to be the exact dimensions, but just like the same kind of shape. Is that what you're trying to say?
No, so you do need the exact dimensions of that shape.
Okay.
So you should be following these dimensions. I'm not expecting you to write on AutoCAD that red text. So I'm not expecting you to go in here and if you make that first like rectangle or whatever, I'm not expecting you to go in and put in dimensions like this.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm not expecting you to put in these dimensions, but it should be to the dimensions that it's specifying. Yeah. Good question though, yeah. Go in here real quick. Yeah, so you don't need to like go in here and make these red dimension lines or anything like that. But the object itself should be to this scale. It should be 3 units wide right here, should be 4 units tall, et cetera, et cetera. Even the starting points, so where it says to start at 0, 0, you should be following those directions as well. Okay, does that make sense? Any other questions? One thing I'll also mention about assignments as well is that a big thing for grading is that I'm only going to dock you marks on things that are either explicitly mentioned in instructions or related to what we just covered in class. So I'm not going to be like really anal about weird stuff. It's just going to be related to something that we just covered or just learned, and that assignment is trying to grade for that, or if it's something explicit in the instructions that you didn't follow. So I'm not going to grade you on weird other stuff. Okay. Any final questions? Okay, if there's no questions, then that's it for tonight. And if you have any questions, by all means, you can send me an email or ask on Thursday.
Awesome. Thank you, Brett.
Yep, no problem. See you Thursday.
Thank you. Thank you.